You're going to love this lady. She can sing so nicely. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Deborah Williams.
Love me.
He was a TV pioneer, a creator of an entire genre.
His foresight into what would turn America on is astonishing.
How do you stop a girl from snoring?
I'll punch her in the mouth.
Chuck Barris created a genre of television in which we capitalize on today.
I'd like to see your tools someday.
Well, we make it together. I'd like to see your chest.
But behind the scenes, he was a man in conflict.
Very private guy. You never really knew much about him.
Now that's a funny one.
I really didn't know the inner workings of Chuck Barris.
Oh, come get me, come get me, come get me.
And he harbored a deep secret.
I was a paid assassin for the CIA.
He's a game show host during the day and a CIA agent at night.
In an exclusive interview, Chuck Barris opens up about his mysterious past.
I think I really screwed up.
All these shows that are on right now, Chuck started all these.
If you think about The Bachelor, what's the difference between that and the dating game? Yes, you get to see the people, but other than that, the essence of the show is exactly the same.
American Idol has tons of Gong Show splattered all over it. The only thing that's missing is the gong.
America's Got Talent on NBC is nothing more than the Gong Show on steroids.
We don't even know oftentimes when we're watching a show that it's the future.
The current TV landscape is saturated with real people positioned as primetime stars. While common now, the practice was revolutionary in 1965 when Chuck Barris broke new ground.
The first time you and your husband made whoopee together, will he say it was funny or serious?
Serious with him. He wanted to come again.
Chuck Barris is the Neil Armstrong of game show creators.
He was the first one that said, okay, most entertaining people in the world are those people at home. Let's go make them stars.
He put people on TV who, at that time, nobody ever thought they should be on TV.
In the late 60s and early 70s, Chuck Barris shows dominated the airwaves. And at its peak, Chuck Barris Productions had an unheard of 27 half hours a week of game show programming on the air.
There was Dating Game, day and night. Newlywed Game, day and night. Dream Girl, Family Game, Operation Entertainment.
In 1976, Chuck created the show that would define his career and made himself the host.
The Unknown Comic!
He was our first nonconformist hippie slash, trippin' host.
But it was a move he would ultimately regret.
What he did wasn't obvious and he didn't get credit. And then because it was a type of show that wasn't popular with the critics, he got a lot of criticism.
Don't just stand there, do something.
In the beginning, I just sloughed those critics off, but they got to me. I mean, over the years, over 15 or 20 years, they got to me.
It was very hurtful. He tried not to let it bother him, but it did bother him, and it was very, very hurtful.
I think part of the time he realized he had gone too far and he was out of control, but, he had gone too far and he was out of control.
There are times when the show seems to have been a wonderful thing to have done, but I wouldn't want to go back and do it again.
Chuck Barris grew up in Ballackinwood, Pennsylvania, a middle-class suburb of Philadelphia. He had a blinding ambition to improve his standing, but little support for his dreams.
The one thing I really didn't appreciate from my parents was a lack of guidance. They didn't care what I did in school, if my marks were good or bad, and they never gave me any incentive to do anything better than just be.
Self-motivated, Chuck attended Drexel University and spent summers working in his grandfather's clothing store.
I left Drexel and went out to Pittsburgh to U.S. Steel, worked in a steel mill. I wanted to become president of U.S. Steel.
But Chuck wasn't cut out for manual labor. He considered returning to Philly, but instead opted for New York.
I think my ambition came from my great fear of ever ending up in that clothing business. That is so scary, to go every day on the bus and go to work in a clothing company and cut patterns and stuff like that.
In 1958, Chuck married his girlfriend, Lynn Levy. Searching for a creative outlet, he decided to pursue a career in television. He devised a plan to gain acceptance into NBC's elite management training program.
They had thousands and thousands of applicants. So I really didn't stand much of a chance. So I went to the library and I looked up who was on the board of directors of the Radio Corporation of America, who owned NBC. And I took 2 or 3 names and I put them down as references. I got right in.
At NBC, Chuck showed the first signs of the zany creativity that would become his trademark.
We both loved music, loved jazz. So Chuck had this ability, which startled me, of imitating a bass fiddle. And I could do a trombone. Well, we had these jam sessions.
We were always afraid of getting caught, but we loved to play together. So we would go into a closet, shut the door, and we'd play Sweet Georgia Brown.
He liked that. He would say, let's do Georgia Brown. We did it yesterday. Let's do it, you know.
We were really good. It probably doesn't sound it, but we were.
Chuck began writing song lyrics in his spare time.
I would go into a bathroom and I would play these songs that I wrote to myself. I'd just sit there on the john singing songs that I wrote. If you listen to some of those early 50s and 60s songs, they're just so simple. So one day I was coming down the West Side Highway and I saw Palisades Park. And a guy goes out the park and he takes a ride in a shooty shoot and the girl he meets is very cute. And I sang it into a tape recorder. And I sent the tape recorder to Freddie Cannon and Bobby Rydell and a bunch of singers that I had seen on American Bandstand.
The management for Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, one of the era's more successful singers, liked Chuck's song and asked Freddie to sing it. They placed it on the B side of a 45.
I took a ride on a shooty shoot. The girl at Sapper side was awful cute. And when we stopped, she was holding hands with me. A little disc jockey in Flint, Michigan, put on Palisades Park, either by mistake or whatever, and then the phones lit up and everything just broke loose. And with the number 3, it jumped fast.
When I heard it on the radio in my car the first time, I had to pull over the side of the road. I mean, I just couldn't believe that something so wonderful was happening.
Freddie called Chuck, anxious for another hit song.
He said, I don't have another one. I said, you mean you got one song in you?
Chuck had bigger goals. In 1962, he earned a job in ABC's daytime programming department. He was sent to Los Angeles to solicit show ideas.
I checked into a motel and I called everybody in town, and I never got any further than the secretary. You know, I was saying, well, just have them return my call to Chuck Barris at the Del Capri Motel. And nobody returned my calls. So I checked into the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I then called the same people back, and I said, Chuck Barris, Bungalow 6, the Beverly Hills Hotel. And they all called me back. I came back with 4 or 5 pilots.
ABC was looking to augment its daytime lineup, which consisted primarily of soap operas. Chuck was instructed to find game show possibilities, but he didn't like what he heard.
He said, I'm very frustrated because these guys come in to pitch me shows, and I'm much better than they are. I said, well, I have a great idea. Why don't you leave and become a producer and try to do your own shows?
Chuck did just that. The first show he pitched was called The Dating Game.
It's The Dating Game!
The basic premise of The Dating Game was a girl speaking behind a wall to 3 bachelors. She couldn't see them, didn't know who they were, and by her questions and their answers, she would pick a date. It was a natural because the ugly duckling of the 3 bachelors might be the smoothest guy.
That's a great idea for a show, Chuck. Let's go make a pilot.
Coming up, Chuck Barris brings sexuality to primetime.
Questions were naughty, the answers were naughty. The Chicago Tribune said daytime television hits all-time low.
Disney comes to life.
In 1965, Chuck Barris was on top of the world, living in Los Angeles with his wife, Lynn, and their baby girl, Della.
Della was great. She was blonde-haired a beautiful little girl.
He produced a pilot of The Dating Game and proudly delivered it to ABC.
And here they are.
It was a huge departure from the standard daytime fare of the era.
Game shows up to that point were rather stodgy affairs. The Price is Right, and with old people.
And I figured that the one thing they don't have is spontaneity. And so the fact that it was youth-oriented and they could say almost anything they wanted it was a perfect formula for that show.
From Hollywood, the dating capital of the world. In color, it's The Dating Game.
The Dating Game was a smash hit.
Chuck extended the opportunity for the average person to get on television. And in those days, there weren't that many opportunities to do that.
I have pierced ears. What would you like to hang on my lobe?
What would I like to hang on your lobe? How about a little kiss, baby?
It wasn't just ordinary people. Celebrities also went on TV looking for a date.
We had Michael Jackson, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger.
We had like Tom Selleck, and we had Burt Reynolds, and we had Ryan O'Neal with Farrah Fawcett.
Let her go!
And then The Dating Game led to the Newlywed Game, and it was the same show on another level. A relationship show. You cared about the people, and you cared about their relationship.
From Hollywood, here come the Newlyweds.
The Newlywed Game, hosted by Bob Eubanks, tested how well members of 4 young couples knew their spouses.
Where specifically will your wife say is the weirdest place she's ever gotten the urge to make whoopee?
In the bathroom sink.
The visual's a killer, isn't it?
Questions were naughty, the answers on the Newlywed Game were naughty, and Chuck always threw those curves in there, and he got the audience titillated.
We got to see into people's bedrooms for the first time. Whoopee became a 4-letter word.
Has your husband, or has he not, ever gotten romantic with 2 girls at the same time?
Oh, never.
He never has.
I told you all about me before.
He said he has.
In those years, you had a lot of people who would get married after they only knew each other for maybe a couple of months.
And they were the most fun couples.
What's his favorite Jewish food, Shirley?
Favorite Jewish? Oh. Corn.
They would blurt out the craziest things.
We all need a form of confession. If you're going to fool around with your wife in an airplane, it's no fun unless you can tell somebody. And we gave them that form of confession.
The Newlywed Game was as popular as its predecessor. Chuck Barris was suddenly the hottest producer in town.
Chuck had found his path. He just knew how to make these kinds of shows work.
They became the golden boy of television.
True to form, Chuck created a production company unlike any other.
It was young and vibrant and edgy.
I showed up for my first day with a shirt and tie on, and they laughed at me. They cut my tie off.
There were 17-year-olds that worked there. when I came to work. Chuck was 37.
I didn't care about resumes. I wasn't into that. And I was taking dropouts.
He once hired a pizza delivery to be a writer.
I showed up one day in a suit and a tie. Chuck is spread out on a couch with his guitar, and he calls a jam session, and he announces the suits are here.
It was like going to an R-rated Disneyland.
The company was a little bit of Camelot. You can't duplicate that again, ever, anywhere, any place. It was just one of a kind and a time all its own.
Everything Chuck touched turned to gold. Networks were begging him for more shows. Everybody wanted to work at Chuck Barris Productions.
And Chuck's staff meetings on Friday were legendary, and Chuck was as funny a performer as I'd ever seen.
I took a can of beer, popped it, and I poured it over my head. It signified that I had sold a new show. And they would cheer and yell and scream and dance.
We'd go marching through the halls, singing, and I mean, there were other offices there. But it seemed like we just kept selling shows and selling shows and I mean, turn around, you were selling another show.
Every day we had 5 shows and 2 nighttime shows. We had 27 half hours of television on, and we would tear around Hollywood on these motorcycles going to contestant run-throughs and tapings, and I can't remember anything that was as wonderful and as exciting as that.
But Chuck wasn't satisfied being a TV mogul. He took a dangerous side job, or so he says.
I was a paid assassin for the CIA.
Chuck did a lot of traveling, and he had, I know, guns under his bed.
Was he really a hitman for the CIA?
In late 1966, new versions of Chuck Barris's daytime hits, The Dating Game and The Newlywed Game, were added to ABC's primetime schedule.
That's when we really knew there was a major hit, and we were all a part of it.
I was working as a disc jockey at the #1 rocker in LA, and I didn't want to give that up because I didn't think this little newlywed thing would last longer than 13 weeks. When we went nighttime, then I knew it was time to get out of radio.
The shows were essentially the same as the daytime versions, but with bigger prizes. The Dating Game winners, who had previously been awarded romantic dinners and weekend getaways, were suddenly whisked away to international destinations. And the hardworking employees of Chuck Barris Productions were their lucky chaperones.
Chuck would call out your name, Linda Michaels. You're going to Madrid, Spain.
I went to Copenhagen, I went to Vienna, I went to Paris.
I went to Amsterdam 7 times. I went to Forte dei Marmi on the coast of Italy.
I went to London for 8 days, a cruise on the Lure Line.
Bangkok, Jamaica, Alaska. I slept on the Queen Mary, took a train ride through the Redwoods.
Chuck also went overseas. In 1971, with his company thriving, he took his first vacation and wrote his first book.
I went to Saint-Tropez, and I wrote You and Me, Babe. It was an autobiographical love story of sorts.
It was on the bestseller list for 7 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a big hit. I loved it. It was a beautiful, beautiful love story.
But Chuck's real love life was in shambles. Consumed by his work, he had grown distant from his wife and daughter.
The company got so big that Chuck was just never home, and he was just always working.
It definitely affected my personal life. Lynn went down to Mexico and started to live down there with my daughter. And eventually we got divorced.
Shortly thereafter, Lynn and Della moved to Switzerland.
That changed the whole dynamic of the father-daughter relationship, because then I would only see her on vacations and school holidays and the summer.
If Della called, no matter what, Chuck was told and would take that call immediately, no matter what he was doing.
But Della's phone calls usually brought bad news.
Della was always getting in trouble. She was really kind of mixed up.
She was a bright, pretty, young thing. But I think that divorce hit her harder than anything. And I think she felt lost.
Coming up.
Della was pretty far down the line into drugs.
Della was very disturbed.
Chuck makes a decision he'll always regret.
I think I really screwed up.
needs.
In 1975, prolific TV producer Chuck Barris had another brainstorm.
It's the Gong Show. It's everybody's chance at the big time. And here's the man who's gonna keep it rocking, Gary Owens.
The Gong Show was an amateur hour for people with no talent.
It was that first opportunity for the absurd and the talented to get on the same stage.
We sat on a panel, and we each would make our judgment predicated on what we saw in front of us, whether we thought it was good, bad, or indifferent.
If we didn't think they could sing or couldn't dance or couldn't, tell jokes or they weren't funny, we were supposed to hit a gong.
Instead of the hook to get people off, it's the gong. And the word gong alone is great. It's a comic word, gong.
Will you gong us, please?
Former Laugh-In announcer Gary Owens was hired to host the pilot, to be shot in San Francisco.
We should have known something was strange because that night it snowed in San Francisco, and a drunk was being arrested on skis for drunken skiing in the city of San Francisco. So that portends something really apropos for the Gong Show.
Talent arrived from all across the country. There was no shortage of people willing to be humiliated on national TV.
We were looking for anything that was out of the ordinary or wacky.
Playing a cello with scuba diving fins, having a lizard up your nose as you're singing. We had a 96-year-old lady playing the tuba.
Just the other day, I was thinking to myself, where are all of the new bell ringers who glow in the dark going to come from?
John Barber was slated to host the daytime version for NBC, but Barber appeared too sensitive. He didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
John Barber was actually searching for real talent.
I remember talking to him, I was blue in the face to try to tell him that this was not a talent show.
I remember taking a series of photographs of Chuck in the corner talking to John Barber and watching the vein on Chuck's neck. It bulged more and more. He was so frustrated. John Barber didn't seem to get it.
NBC executive Marilyn David watched Chuck try to explain the tone of the show to Barber. She had an idea. Chuck needed to be the show's host.
She said, either you do it or we won't put the show on.
I stayed up most of the night thinking about it. Of course, the greed was all there, and the ham in me, and all of those rotten factors. I said, I'll do it, and we went on the air.
And here's the host and star of the show, Chuck Barris.
Thank you, and welcome to the Gong Show.
When Chuck started to host the Gong Show, I was surprised. And at first, I thought it liberated the playful side of him.
Here's a 27-year-old girl who comes from a family of 12 kids. Even so, every morning they had scrambled eggs. Their mother would put one egg on the table, and the 12 of them would scramble for her. You bet.
He came out with a hat with a bill right down so you never saw his eyes. Just the mouth and the hat. He was funny.
Chuck got the essence of what was going on with his silliness and his clapping of the hands, and we were all having a party. Everybody was there to visit with us and have fun at the party.
Chuck quickly grew into the role, and audiences loved him. He decided to take over the nighttime hosting duties as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa Welch.
If I could save time in a bottle.
The Gong Show was an enormous success. As the show got bigger and more popular, the acts got more bizarre.
We had one fella who carried Polaroids around in his pocket, and he made faces. That was his act. We all told him, gee, you've got a wonderful act. And I remember this fella said, you know, I don't do that for a living. I said, no fooling. No, he said, no, I'm an accountant.
This was good. This was gold. This is the stuff we were really looking for.
I give you the great escapo. He will now sing a song for us.
Please release me. Let me go.
We had an Asian man singing Remember Pearl Harbor in Japanese.
Remember Pearl Harbor.
You know, and we did it on Pearl Harbor Day. It was, who would ever think of such a thing? That was Chuck.
For Chuck, the Gong Show was no holds barred. Friends, family, even stagehands could be part of the show.
You'll hit that pencil, then you station about 3:45. Read a magazine, and then you're in Baltimore.
Gene the Dancing Machine was sweeping up backstage.
They were playing music, you know. I was out there climbing with the broom. I said, this here is what they call a pimp stick in the county jail.
He was doing this little jig, a little wiggle with his feet, and I told him, come out and do it on the show, and he became a huge star. We had an electrician dressed up as a priest, and we called him Father Ed. And halfway through his speech, we turned the cue cards over, upside down, and he...
Well, my child, I would like to discuss today dialectical trinity and its effect upon monarchical biblical terminologies.
Also regularly appearing was Chuck's daughter, Della,
That's my kid. Her name is Della. Okay, get lost, kid.
who had moved back to L.A. and was living with her famous father.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the host and star of the show, my daddy!
But the smiling girl on the Gong Show bore little resemblance to the troubled teen at home.
When she did come to live with me, she seemed to go downhill faster, and I didn't seem to be able to have all the right answers. She got into that major drug scene, and it was difficult, very difficult after that.
My fiance, Yvonne, who worked in the company, it was our job to take care of Della, and, you know, she was a handful.
I remember taking Della to a psychiatrist, and after talking to her for an hour, he came out, and the only thing he said to me was, "You have a tiger by the tail." She came by my office when she was 16, and she told me that she was leaving. And I told her, you know, go. And I think that was the crux, the crucial point of our relationship. If I would have said, I refuse to let you go, you will stay here, and you will continue to go to school, I think that's what she wanted me to say. And if I had my life to live over again, I would have her, I would say that, but.
He gave her kind of a large sum of money and said, you know, you've got to go do what you have to do, because he didn't know how else to handle it.
I told her to go off and don't come back until she was clean, which I think was a terrible mistake to make. I think I really screwed up.
Up ahead, Della's spiral continues.
It's a tragedy, because I think he adored her.
On the leaderboard.
By the late 70s, Chuck Barris's Gong Show had become a cultural phenomenon. Chuck, as the face of the show, became a star. He enjoyed the perks of celebrity, but the lack of privacy quickly wore on him. Everywhere Chuck went was an open audition for the Gong Show.
He really couldn't go anywhere. It was Chucky, 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 wherever he went.
People would stop me on the street or on an airplane, come up the aisle and kneel down next to me and start doing these, you know, animals, these giraffes and lizards.
We went to a prize fight in Los Angeles at the Forum one night. And we walk in, and he looks around, he says, I can't be here. I guess people were recognizing him, and he just split. He left.
I remember spending a long time trying to get a mustache at Max Factor or something. And after a long process of finding the right hair color and the right size, the right shape, I walked out and somebody said, "Hey, Chuck," and I just took it off, threw it away.
Chuck's discomfort with fame was scarcely evident on the air. He got zanier with each episode.
It's hard to explain the metamorphosis that took place. I had a holster with a rooster sticking out of it and a cowboy hat and crazy shirts.
We'll be right back with more stuff right after this message. Yeah.
He was absurd. He would lose his place in the show, and it didn't matter. It was just outrageous.
The show, along with its host and executive producer, became even more ridiculous. In 1978, it finally crossed the line when the Popsicle Twins made an appearance.
Two girls walked out, sit down, broke the popsicles in half, and started licking the popsicles.
Do it! Do it!
I don't know how they got on the air. They each had those big popsicles, and they were busy with the popsicles.
We kept waiting for standards and practices to stop the production. We kept figuring, oh my goodness, I guess it was all right to do this.
The president of NBC called Chuck in, and Chuck came in sucking on a popsicle.
The backlash from the Popsicle Twins episode hit hard. Criticism of Chuck Barris reached a fever pitch.
People thought this is the lowest point in television. This is what Newton Minow meant when he called it a vast wasteland.
Suddenly, all of Chuck's shows came under scrutiny. They were lambasted as vile, sophomoric, and exploitative.
People would say, how can you do that? You know, how can you allow someone to make fun of somebody and put them down in front of the entire nation?
But Chuck and his staff knew the truth. There were no victims. Audiences loved the show, and the contestants were having the time of their lives.
How can you say he exploited people? They exploited him in the final analysis. They came to him to show off that they were out of their minds.
At the end of each audition, I basically would say the same thing. Thank you very much. We've just recorded your audition on tape, and the producers will look at it, and if they're interested, they'll get back in touch with you. I can't tell you how many people would come up and say, well, I've just driven in here from Michigan, and I'm living in my car. Can I call you? We must have had that happen 3 or 4 times a day. People would come in from all over the country, no place to stay, just for a chance to get on television.
But eventually, the criticism began to take its toll. Chuck began to unravel.
Chuck was, I don't want this to sound harsh, out of control. And there was nobody to say no. And so he just did it.
A lot of people think that Chuck was on drugs, but in actual fact, that was not the case. Chuck was very, very, very down on drugs and didn't permit it in the company.
It used to really make me angry when they'd say, oh, he's on drugs up there. He was not. Never.
Take me away now. I'm going crazy. I've always felt I had a midlife crisis right on Coast to Coast television.
I'm 47 years old. I'm talking to a naval.
I just did a 360 in the studio. The audience was screaming. The band was on back and forth at the audience. They were setting up a crazy act behind me. And everybody was going nuts. And it just all of a sudden seemed to be too much. Shortly after that, it was done.
Coming up, Chuck calls it quits.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our last show.
I just got so tired of being the schlockmeister and the king of schlock and lowering the bar and doing all that.
And Chuck speaks directly about the mystery that has surrounded his life.
He's a game show host during the day and a CIA agent at night.
Value free.
In 1980, after 4 years and hundreds of episodes, The Gong Show went off the air. As a last hurrah, Chuck made a Gong Show movie, starring and directed by himself.
How do you like the act? One more time before you go. I kind of like that. You did. Very good. All right. Well, thank you. You can take your little musical schlong and go right out the door. I want to do all these sight gags, and I started that way, and then somewhere along the line, about midway in that movie, I became serious, and I wanted to make a serious statement, and that was so wrong.
Everybody thinks of me now as some kind of a clown, you know, buffoon, an idiot jumping around the stage like a damn fool. I'd just like to do something meaningful.
The picture opened up here at the Beekman Theater, and I went to the 12 o'clock show, and the usher said to me, "You're not gonna like this." And he took my ticket and ripped it up.
The movie bombed. It was out of theaters in 3 days.
I was very angry and bitter, and I went back to New York and checked into the Wyndham Hotel and just wanted to get anger out of my system. And I thought if I wrote it down, and 3 years later, I had Confessions of a Dangerous Mind.
Chuck's second book was subtitled An Unauthorized Autobiography. Its premise was shocking.
Confessions is about my life in the television business and as an assassin for the CIA. The basic premise is that when I created a dating game and I created the opportunity to send dates to Europe, I could go along as a chaperone and do work for the CIA.
According to the book, Chuck performed 33 assassinations while running the dating game.
I went into his office. I said, "Chuck, is there any truth in this? Is this really true?" And he looked up at me and he said, "I just can't say."
I saw him kill 3 guys one night.
Chuck did a lot of traveling, and he had, I know, guns under his bed. So who knows?
I looked in the mirror and I said, if he's CIA, you're Mary Poppins, Bob.
I think it's kind of great that this question exists. This is a book that has a premise, and you either buy it or you don't buy it, and that's that.
Unfortunately, nobody bought it. The book, that is.
It didn't sell. It just disappeared, came out and disappeared.
In 1987, Chuck sold his company for tens of millions of dollars. He and his future wife, Robin Altman, moved to France.
I spent a couple of weekends with him in the south of France. I watched him play boule with the locals. I'd go with him every morning down to the local bar, buy the Herald Tribune, drink coffee.
I had a boat, and then about 5:36, I'd take the boat out and just go swimming out there and play around. It was a really good life.
After 10 years in France, Chuck moved back to New York. He and Robin divorced. Chuck fell in love with Mary Claggett Kane, an Atlantan 30 years his junior, and he reconnected with his daughter Della.
By that time, Della was pretty far down the line into drugs, and there was very little that I think that you could do.
I think she got married once and then divorced, and then she kind of became a recluse.
Della was sweet, but Della was very disturbed, and I think Della was very advanced in her drug addiction. But she was certainly making an effort to have a relationship with her father, and he was making an effort to have a relationship with her.
In July of 1998, Chuck's worst nightmare came to life.
Mary and I had come to LA to spend the weekend, and we had found out that she had committed suicide.
It was an accidental drug overdose. I don't think she intended to kill herself.
It was awful. It was awful for him. It was just heartbreaking.
The whole scenario of Della is just painful. Just painful. I think it's a tragedy because I think he adored her.
What I garnered out of this whole tale was that you can't let go of your kid. You got to hang on to her and try your very best to the bitter end to make things better between you and your child.
Thank you. Hey, isn't she lovely? Isn't she wonderful? Isn't she precious? Less than 1 minute old. I never thought.
In February of 2001, Chuck Barris got married for the third time.
The girl of my dreams, and I really love her, and we're very happy.
She's just a terrific person, and he's so happy. I think he's never been happier in his life.
A year later, Chuck's long-forgotten, unauthorized autobiography was resurrected as a movie. George Clooney directed, and Sam Rockwell played Chuck. Julia Roberts and Drew Barrymore took supporting roles. Chuck was suddenly in demand. He performed book readings coast to coast.
I would go to like Barnes & Noble and Astor Place, and the place would be jammed and hanging from the rafters.
Chuck started to realize that maybe there were a few people out there who liked what he did.
It was a turnaround for me, and it started to make me think that, things weren't as bad as all that.
Of course, Chuck was once again questioned about his duties with the CIA.
He doesn't answer when I ask him. And when people ask me, I say, Chuck is a hired killer? He couldn't kill a fly.
I'll never admit to anyone, as long as I'm around, whether I was or wasn't, because I don't think the reader cares, other than if you read Confessions and you enjoyed it, that's good.
Chuck is now a full-time author. He hasn't produced a TV series in more than 20 years, but his imprint is all over the airwaves.
All these current shows are based on a lot of Chuck's old ideas.
Those shows were the first relationship shows with real people.
Chuck Barris created a genre of television in which we capitalize on today.
He was an innovator in American TV. Chuck Barris is the best thing that happened to television in its early days because he made it real.
TV historians laud Chuck as one of the medium's pioneers, but he fears that he'll be remembered simply as Chucky Baby, ringleader of TV's wacky funhouse.
I still think I'm going to be the guy who gave us the Gong Show, but maybe if I write enough books, maybe they'll think of me as a writer.